I never expected that my cousin's best friend needing a place to crash would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. It's funny how the biggest shifts often start with the smallest, most mundane problems, like a burst pipe and a lumpy couch. For me, it started with a frantic phone call that shattered the quiet, predictable rhythm of my Tuesday evening. My name is Lucas. At the time, I was 28, and my life was a carefully curated collection of quiet routines. I worked as an archivist at the local university, a job that suited my personality perfectly. I spent my days surrounded by the silent, orderly stories of the past, cataloging letters and photographs, finding comfort in the logical arrangement of history. My apartment was an extension of that philosophy, a one-bedroom sanctuary, neat and calm, where every book had its place and the silence was a welcome friend after a long day. It was a life of contentment, I told myself, a life of peace. But sometimes, in the deep quiet of the evening, a different word would surface, one I tried to push away: lonely. It wasn't a constant ache, more like a low, background hum I had learned to ignore. I had my cousin, Liam, and a few friends from work, but my connections were often kept at a comfortable, manageable distance. I was an observer, more at home watching life from the sidelines than participating in its messy, unpredictable center. And from those sidelines, I had often observed Caleb. Caleb was Liam's best friend, and he was the absolute opposite of me in every conceivable way. He was a builder, his hands calloused and capable, his shoulders broad from years of physical work. He was loud, not in an obnoxious way, but in a way that just took up space, his laughter filling every room he entered. I'd seen him at family barbecues and a few of Liam's birthday parties, always holding a beer, always the center of a story, and almost always with a stunningly beautiful girl laughing at his side. He was, to my quietly observant eyes, the definitive straight guy, confident, charming, effortlessly masculine, and so far out of my orbit that he might as well have been on a different planet. He was a fantasy, a type I might admire from the absolute safety of distance, but never someone I would actually interact with. He was handsome in a rugged, easy way that made my stomach do a little flip, a fact I diligently ignored every time I saw him. He was, in short, completely and utterly unattainable. So when Liam called me that Tuesday, his voice a jumble of panic and apology, Caleb was the last person I expected to become the topic of conversation. "Lucas, man, I am so sorry to do this to you," he started, and I immediately braced myself. "You're not going to believe this, but Caleb's apartment building, the pipes on his floor just exploded. The whole place is flooded. It's a total disaster." I made a sympathetic noise, picturing the chaos. "Oh wow, is he okay?" "Yeah, he's fine, but his place is wrecked. He can't stay there for at least a few weeks, maybe a month," Liam rushed on. "And look, I'd take him in a heartbeat. You know I would. But Sarah just moved in, and my place is basically a closet. There's literally no room. I was wondering. I know it's a huge ask, but could he maybe, just maybe, crash on your couch for a little while?" My mind immediately recoiled. My quiet space, my orderly sanctuary, invaded. And not just by anyone, but by Caleb, by the loud laughter and the confident energy and the sheer overwhelming presence of him. It felt like letting a hurricane into a library. "Just for a couple of weeks, tops," Liam pleaded, sensing my hesitation. "He's super clean, I swear. He just really needs a place to land. He's got nowhere else to go." And that was the line that did it. Nowhere else to go, my kind heart, the one I often cursed for its inability to say no, overruled every single one of my anxieties. The image of Caleb, displaced and worried, was more potent than my own need for solitude. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. "Yeah, okay. He can use the couch. You're a lifesaver." "Seriously, Lucas, thank you," Liam said, the relief in his voice palpable. "He'll be over in an hour." I hung up the phone and stared at my living room. I looked at the neatly stacked books on the coffee table, the perfectly plumped cushions on the sofa, the quiet, empty space. An hour. In an hour, the hurricane would arrive. I took a deep, steadying breath, my heart thumping with a nervous rhythm that was equal parts dread and, to my utter confusion, a tiny, terrifying flutter of something else. Something that felt dangerously like anticipation. Let me take you back to that first evening. Caleb arrived with a single duffel bag slung over his shoulder and an expression that was a mix of gratitude and genuine apology. He stood in my doorway, seeming even larger than I remembered, and for a moment, I felt like my apartment had physically shrunk around him. The air crackled with a nervous energy that was entirely my own. "Lucas, man, I can't thank you enough," he said, his voice a low rumble that was much softer than the booming laugh I was used to hearing from across a backyard. "I promise I'll be completely out of your hair. You won't even know I'm here." That, I thought, was highly unlikely, but I just nodded and offered a small, hopefully welcoming smile. "It's no problem. Really. Come on in." The first few days were an exercise in awkward navigation. We were two celestial bodies that had been forced into the same tiny orbit, trying desperately not to collide. I would wake up early for work and find him already gone, leaving behind only the faint, pleasant scent of his soap in the bathroom and a neatly folded blanket on the couch. I'd come home in the evening, and he would be there, either reading a paperback or scrolling through his phone, and he would immediately stand up as if to cede the space to me. It was strange. He was so much quieter than I expected. The boisterous, life-of-the-party guy was replaced by this incredibly considerate and respectful roommate. He was meticulous. He washed his own coffee mug the second he was done with it. He lined up his work boots neatly by the door. He insisted on buying groceries, stocking my fridge with things I never bought for myself, like steak and actual, non-instant coffee. Slowly, the awkwardness began to melt away, replaced by a tentative routine. I discovered I liked cooking for two. It felt less like a chore and more like an event. I would cook, and without a word, Caleb would take on the dishes, his large hands carefully scrubbing plates in the sink, his back muscles shifting under his t-shirt. We started eating dinner together at my small kitchen table, the silence gradually filling with conversation. We talked about simple things at first. Our days, work, Liam's latest ridiculous antic. I learned that his job wasn't just physical labor, it was a craft. He spoke about wood grains and structural integrity with a passion that surprised me. He wasn't just a builder, he was a creator. And he was a good listener, asking questions about my work at the archives, his brow furrowed with genuine interest as I explained the delicate process of preserving centuries-old documents. He was dismantling my carefully constructed image of him piece by piece. The unattainable straight guy was being replaced by someone real, someone thoughtful, and surprisingly gentle. The flutter in my chest was becoming a more persistent, undeniable presence. Then came the night that changed everything. It was about a week into his stay. I was in the kitchen making tea, and Caleb was sitting on the couch, unusually quiet. I glanced over and saw he had a sketchbook open on his lap, a pencil moving deftly across the page. He was so absorbed, he didn't notice me watching. Curiosity got the better of me. "What you working on?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He jumped, snapping the sketchbook shut as if I'd caught him doing something forbidden. A flush crept up his neck. "Oh, nothing. Just messing around." His reaction only made me more intrigued. "It looked like more than nothing," I said gently, leaning against the counter. "Can I see?" He hesitated for a long moment, his gaze flicking from the closed book to my face. He seemed to be weighing something. Finally, with a sigh of resignation, he opened it and turned it towards me. I was stunned. The page wasn't just a doodle. It was a breathtakingly intricate architectural drawing. It was a design for a modern cabin, with clean lines, massive windows, and a seamless integration into a forest landscape. It was detailed, professional, and beautiful. "Caleb, this is incredible," I said, my voice full of genuine awe. I walked over to get a closer look. "Where did you learn to do this?" He shrugged, a self-deprecating gesture that didn't match the talent on the page. "Just taught myself, I guess. I've always liked it. You know, building things." But starting from the beginning, he looked down at his hands. "I wanted to be an architect. I just never felt smart enough for all the school it would take. So, I went into construction instead. Seemed more practical." In that moment, I saw it. The first real crack in his confident facade. A flicker of vulnerability, of a dream deferred. It was a side of him I never could have imagined, a quiet, artistic soul hidden beneath the sawdust and easy smiles. It made him seem suddenly, achingly human. It made the fluttering in my chest feel less like a crush and more like a deep, resonant pull. This new knowledge sat between us, a silent secret that shifted our dynamic. It felt like I had been given a glimpse behind the curtain, and I found myself wanting to see more. The distance between us was shrinking every day, and the air in my small apartment was growing heavier with unspoken possibilities. The next morning, the tension solidified into something tangible. I was up early, as usual, moving quietly through my pre-work routine. I'd made coffee, the good stuff Caleb had bought, and the rich aroma filled the small kitchen. He emerged from the living room, his hair tousled from sleep, stretching his arms over his head with a groan. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice thick and gravelly. "Morning," I replied, my voice sounding a little too bright in the quiet room. I poured him a mug and turned to hand it to him. It was a simple, everyday action. But as he reached for the mug, his fingers brushed against mine. It wasn't a quick, accidental graze. For a split second, his fingers lingered, warm and calloused against my skin. It was an electric shock, a tiny, silent explosion in the space between us. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. My eyes flew to his, and I saw a flicker of something in their depths, surprise, maybe, or a question. His gaze held mine for a beat longer than was strictly necessary, a silent, charged moment that seemed to stretch into an eternity. Then he looked down at the mug in his hands, breaking the spell. "Thanks," he said, his voice quiet. "You're welcome," I managed to squeak out. Neither of us said anything else. But the apartment, which had started to feel comfortably shared, suddenly felt intensely small again. I could feel the heat from that brief touch on my skin for the rest of the day. I sat at my desk in the silent archives, surrounded by history, but my mind was stuck on that single second. I replayed it over and over, analyzing it, dissecting it, trying to decipher its meaning. Was it an accident? Was it my imagination? Or was it, just maybe, a signal? That little spark of hope was terrifying. It was a fragile, wild thing, and I didn't know what to do with it. But I knew one thing for certain. The carefully ordered world I had built for myself was being irrevocably, wonderfully, and frighteningly rearranged. The line between roommate and something more was blurring, and I had no idea which side we would land on when it finally disappeared. The turning point came a few nights later. It arrived not with a bang, but in the dead quiet of my own bedroom. I had stayed late at the university, working on a new collection that had just been donated, a series of letters from a soldier in the Second World War. They were beautiful and heartbreaking, and I had lost all track of time, absorbed in a love story from another era. When I finally got home, it was well past midnight. The apartment was dark and silent. I assumed Caleb was asleep on the couch, so I moved as quietly as I could, slipping off my shoes by the door and tiptoeing towards my bedroom. I was bone-tired, my mind still half lost in the faded ink of the letters, a profound sense of melancholy clinging to me. All I wanted was to fall into my own bed and let the day dissolve. I pushed my bedroom door open, the old wood groaning softly. The room was cast in the silver glow of the streetlight outside my window, painting everything in shades of gray and black. And my heart stopped. Caleb was not on the couch. He was in my bed. He was lying on his side, fast asleep, facing the door as if he'd been waiting. He had taken up more than his share of the mattress, one arm thrown across the pillow where my head was supposed to be. His chest rose and fell in a slow, deep rhythm. The blanket was pulled around his waist, and in the dim light, I could see the strong lines of his back and shoulders. My first thought was a surge of something sharp and indignant. This was my space, my one truly private sanctuary in the world. He had crossed a line, a significant one, without even asking. I should have been angry. I should have woken him up, told him to go back to the couch, re-established the boundary he had so casually ignored. But I wasn't angry. As I stood there in the doorway, my bag still on my shoulder, all I felt was a profound and overwhelming stillness. The anger just wasn't there. Instead, something else bloomed in my chest, something warm and achingly tender. He looked so different in sleep. The confidence, the easy grin, the slight guardedness I was just starting to notice, it was all gone. He looked younger, completely unguarded. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and I could see the faint, silvery line of a scar above his eyebrow that I'd never noticed before. He looked peaceful. He looked vulnerable. I should have cleared my throat. I should have turned on the light. I should have done a dozen sensible things. But I did none of them. Instead, I found myself quietly setting my bag down. I moved around the room with practiced stealth, changing out of my work clothes and into a soft t-shirt and pajama pants. My every movement was slow, deliberate, terrified of breaking the spell of the moment. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild, panicked beat that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. What was I doing? This was insane. I walked to the edge of the bed and just stood there for a long moment, watching him breathe. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me, telling me to go sleep on the couch myself, to preserve my dignity and avoid the most awkward morning in human history. But another part of me, a part one hadn't realized was so strong, was pulling me forward. It was the same part that had been captivated by his unexpected kindness, by his hidden artistry, by the brief, electric touch of his hand. It was a part of me that was tired of being sensible, tired of living on the sidelines. So I did the craziest thing I have ever done in my entire life. I pulled back the edge of the duvet, the fabric whispering as I moved it. I slipped into the small amount of space he had left for me. The mattress dipped under my weight, and for a terrifying second, Caleb stirred, murmuring something in his sleep before settling again. I held my breath until my lungs burned. Then I was in. I lay on my side, my back to him, a rigid line of tension. I was acutely aware of the heat radiating from his body, just inches from mine. I could smell the faint scent of his soap on the pillows, mingled with his own unique, warm scent. It was overwhelming. It was intimate. It felt more significant than any kiss I'd ever had. After a few minutes of lying stiff as a board, I dared to relax. I let my muscles unclench, let my breathing return to normal. And then I did something even bolder. I slowly, carefully, turned over to face him. He hadn't moved. His face was only a foot from mine. I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the flutter of his eyelashes against his cheek. I lay there, in my own bed with the man I was falling for, and just watched him sleep. The world outside my window, the university, the archives, the entire city, it all just faded away. There was only the quiet room, the silver moonlight, and the sound of our breathing, almost in sync. A strange sense of rightness settled over me, a feeling so powerful it eclipsed all my anxiety. It felt like coming home to a place I had never been before. I didn't know what tomorrow morning would bring. I didn't know if this was a mistake of catastrophic proportions. But in that moment, lying next to him, I didn't care. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't observing. I was a part of the story, and I fell asleep, not to the familiar sound of silence, but to the steady, comforting beat of another person's heart. Waking up was a slow, terrifying process. My first conscious thought was of warmth. An unfamiliar, heavy warmth was pressed against my back. My second thought was that an arm was draped over my waist, holding me securely. My eyes snapped open, and the reality of the situation crashed down on me with the force of a tidal wave. Caleb. I was in bed with Caleb. He had shifted in the night and was now curled around me, his front pressed against my back, his breath warm on my neck. Panic, pure and undiluted, seized me. I had to get out of there before he woke up. I had to pretend this never happened. I tried to inch away, to slide out from under his arm, but the moment I moved, he tightened his grip, pulling me closer with a soft, sleepy murmur. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure he could feel it. This was it. This was the most awkward morning in human history, and I was its star. It was too late. I felt his breathing change, felt him slowly coming awake behind me. The arm around my waist tensed, then went completely still. There was a long, silent beat where neither of us moved, both frozen in the horrifying realization of our position. Then, he snatched his arm back as if he'd touched a hot stove. He scrambled backwards, putting a sudden, cold distance between us. The sound of rustling sheets was deafening in the quiet room. I took a shaky breath and slowly rolled over to face him. He was sitting up, leaning against the headboard, his hands covering his face. He looked utterly mortified. The silence stretched on, thick and unbearable, filled with every unspoken question we both had. "I am so sorry," he finally whispered, his voice raspy. He wouldn't look at me. "Lucas, I am so sorry. The couch was just killing my back. I swear. I just thought I'd lie down here for a minute to stretch out, and I must have fallen asleep. I didn't mean to. I shouldn't have." His excuse was plausible. It was sensible. It was the perfect escape hatch for both of us. All I had to do was accept it. I could say, "It's fine, don't worry about it." And we could both pretend that he had woken up alone, that I had slept on the couch, that none of this had happened. We could go back to our cautious, careful orbit. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't lie. And more than that, I couldn't let him lie either. Because I had seen his face in the moonlight, and I had felt the way he held me in his sleep. So I just looked at him and said the simple, terrifying truth. "I slept here all night, Caleb." His head snapped up, his eyes wide. He finally looked at me, and I saw a storm of emotions in his gaze. Shock, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe? Or was it hope? "You what?" he stammered. "I came home late. I found you here," I explained, my voice barely a whisper. "I should have woken you up, but I didn't. I got in with you." The admission hung in the air between us, heavy and fragile. Now it was all out in the open. The awkwardness intensified, becoming a physical presence in the room. We just stared at each other, the gulf between the two sides of the bed feeling like a vast canyon. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. He ran a hand through his already messy hair, looking completely lost. The days that followed were excruciating. We retreated to opposite ends of the apartment. The easy camaraderie we had built completely shattered. The shared dinners stopped. The comfortable conversations were replaced by monosyllabic exchanges about who was using the shower first. The air was thick with the weight of that night, with the things we had both done and the things we had both admitted. I was a wreck. I spent every waking moment replaying the entire scenario, analyzing every detail until my head ached. Why had he really slept in my bed? Was it just about a sore back? And was he now horrified by my confession? Or was there more to it? And why on earth had I gotten in with him? My own actions felt reckless and insane in the harsh light of day. I had taken a massive risk, laying my feelings bare without any protection, and now I was living in the fallout. Hope and fear were at war inside me. One moment, I would remember the feeling of his arm around me, the rightness of it, and a dizzying hope would surge through my chest. Maybe, just maybe, he felt it too. But then, I would see the way he avoided my eyes, the strained set of his jaw, and a cold dread would wash over me. I had misread everything. I had made him uncomfortable, ruined our budding friendship, and made a complete fool of myself. He was probably just trying to figure out how to escape without causing a scene. He was probably counting the seconds until his own apartment was livable again. The silence was an agony, and every moment we spent in that apartment together felt like walking on broken glass. The tension stretched for 2 full days, a taut, vibrating wire that threatened to snap at any moment. I was starting to think it would just stay like this, a permanent state of unbearable awkwardness, until he finally moved out and we never spoke again. I was already mourning the loss of the friend I had just started to find. Then, on the second night of the Cold War, I was standing in the kitchen, staring blankly into the open refrigerator, trying to summon the energy to make dinner for one. I heard him move behind me, his footsteps hesitant. I braced myself for another clipped, functional question. "Lucas." His voice was quiet but firm, and it made me turn around. He was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression serious. He looked nervous, which was still a look I wasn't used to seeing on him. "We need to talk," he said, and my stomach plummeted. This was it. This was the "I'm moving out tomorrow, and let's please forget this ever happened" speech. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and leaned back against the counter, preparing for the blow. He took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into cold water. "What I said the other morning, about my back," he started, his eyes fixed on the floor. "That wasn't the whole truth." I waited, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. He finally lifted his head and met my gaze. His eyes were filled with a raw vulnerability that stole my breath. "My back was fine," he said, his voice low and strained. "I mean, the couch isn't great, but that's not why I was in your bed. I just wanted to be closer to you. I know that sounds crazy, and I know I had no right. But I was lying there on the couch, and I couldn't stop thinking about you being in the next room. And I just did it. It was a stupid, impulsive thing to do, and I'm sorry." I stared at him, my brain struggling to process his words. He wasn't apologizing for being in my bed. He was apologizing for the lie. He wanted to be closer to me. The words echoed in the stunned silence of my mind. But what I don't get, he continued, taking a hesitant step into the kitchen, is why you didn't kick me out. You said you got in with me. Why? It was my turn. The question hung between us, demanding an answer, demanding the same terrifying honesty he had just offered me. I could have deflected. I could have mumbled something about being too tired to argue. But looking at his earnest, anxious face, I knew I couldn't. Because, I said, my voice barely audible. I cleared my throat and tried again, forcing myself to meet his intense gaze. Because when I saw you there, it didn't feel wrong. It felt right. And I think I wanted to be closer to you, too. A wave of relief washed over his face, so palpable it was like watching the sun break through clouds. A slow, shaky smile touched his lips. You have no idea how long I've wanted to hear you say something like that, he breathed. Me? I asked, incredulous. I thought, Caleb, I've had a crush on you for years. Since the first time I met you at Liam's. I just always assumed, you know. I gestured vaguely, encompassing his entire confident, charming, and seemingly straight persona. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Yeah, I know. That was part protection, part confusion. I've dated women. It wasn't a lie exactly. It just never felt right. Not like this. He took another step closer, closing the remaining distance between us. When Liam told me about your apartment, about you living alone, my place flooding was real, but asking to stay here, with you, that was a plan. A crazy, long-shot plan. I thought if I could just be around you, I could figure out if I was just imagining things, or if maybe, just maybe, there was a chance. We stood there, less than a foot apart, everything finally out in the open. All the misinterpretations, all the assumptions, all the fear, it all just evaporated into the warm air of my little kitchen. We had both been looking at each other from across a vast distance, each convinced the other was on an entirely different plane of existence, completely unattainable. So, he said, his voice soft now, questioning, is this okay? He gestured to the small space between us, a space that was now humming with an entirely new kind of energy. I couldn't find the words, so I just nodded, a huge, goofy smile spreading across my face. That was all the confirmation he needed. He reached out, his hand gently cupping my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I met him halfway. The kiss was nothing like I had imagined. It wasn't tentative or questioning. It was sure. It was certain. It was filled with all the weeks of unspoken tension, all the months of secret admiration, all the relief of finally being understood. It was a kiss that tasted like home, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that nothing in my quiet, orderly life would ever be the same again. The weeks that followed the confession were a blur of giddy discovery. It was like seeing the world in color for the first time after a lifetime of black and white. My small, quiet apartment, once a sanctuary of solitude, became a hub of laughter and life. The silence I had once cherished was replaced by the sound of Caleb's low voice, the scratch of his pencil in his sketchbook, the shared soundtrack of our lives. Caleb's apartment was eventually repaired, the landlord calling to say he could move back in. He told him to find a new tenant. He moved his duffel bag from my living room into my bedroom closet, a simple act that felt as momentous as a marriage proposal. My couch, the catalyst for this whole crazy story, was officially retired from sleeping duty. We fell into a new rhythm, one that was infinitely more comfortable and exciting than the one I had known before. We learned each other's worlds. I spent a Saturday afternoon on one of his job sites, breathing in the smell of sawdust and fresh paint, watching with awe as he commanded a team, his competence and passion a tangible thing. He, in turn, came to the university archives, spending hours sitting in quiet reverence as I showed him fragile, centuries-old manuscripts. He traced the faded script on a Civil War letter with a gentle finger, his expression full of a wonder that made me love him even more. We went on actual dates, something that still felt like a novelty. We went to movies, to restaurants, on long hikes in the hills outside the city. We held hands walking down the street, a simple act of public affection that filled me with a quiet, fierce joy. I introduced him to my work friends as my boyfriend, the word feeling both strange and perfectly natural on my tongue. He took me to a barbecue at Liam's, and this time, I wasn't the quiet cousin watching from the sidelines. I was standing next to Caleb, his arms securely around my waist, an undeniable part of his world. Liam just grinned at us, a knowing, triumphant look on his face. A few months melted by, turning from a cool autumn into the crisp beginning of winter. One night, we were lying in bed, my bed, which had so quickly and seamlessly become our bed. A soft lamp cast a warm glow over the room. I was propped up against the pillows, reading a book, while Caleb lay beside me on his stomach, his sketchbook open, the pencil flying across the page. I glanced over at his drawing. It was another house, but this one felt different. It was a home. I could see the porch swing, the big kitchen window, the spot where a garden would go. It was our future, sketched out in graphite and dreams. He must have felt me looking, because he paused and turned his head, a soft smile on his face. "You know," he said, his voice a low, comfortable rumble. "I'm really glad my apartment flooded." I laughed, leaning down to kiss him. "Me too," I said against his lips. "Best plumbing disaster ever." He set his sketchbook aside and pulled me down, wrapping his arms around me. We lay there in the quiet comfort, tangled together, and I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. It was a different kind of quiet than the one I used to cultivate. This quiet wasn't empty, it was full. It was full of contentment, of shared understanding, of a future I had never been brave enough to imagine for myself. That's how life works sometimes, isn't it? You spend so long building these careful walls around yourself, curating a safe, predictable, and orderly existence. You design your life for one, convinced that it's easier that way, safer. You offer up the guest space, the couch, the polite and manageable part of yourself. And then, if you're very, very lucky, someone comes along who is bold enough, or maybe just desperate enough, to ignore the space you offered. They walk right past the couch, right through the boundaries you thought were so important, and they make themselves at home in the most vulnerable part of your world without even asking. They make a home in your bed. They make a home in your heart. And in doing so, they don't tear down your walls. They just show you that the walls were never really there to keep people out. They were just waiting for the right person to finally give you a reason to open the door.